Hi, I'm Brian Garman, the artistic director and co-founder of Berkshire Opera Festival. As most of you know, these very strange and uncertain times that we're living through have forced us to make some changes to our programming this summer. Part of the bad news, of course, is that we are not able to go through with our original plan of presenting Mozart's Don Giovanni in a fully staged production with sets and costumes and lights and wigs and makeup. But the good news is that we are still going forward with Don Giovanni, but in concert, in a very, very semi-staged, simply semi-staged version that will allow us to follow all of the mandated safety protocols and social distancing requirements as determined by the state of Massachusetts in phase 3 of their reopening plan. Now, Don Giovanni, of course, is based on the legend of Don Juan, the infamous Spanish philanderer. And in the opera, his first victim, whom we see and hear, is the noble woman Donna Anna. She's the daughter of the commendatore and the fiancée of Don Ottavio. And in our production, the role of Donna Anna is being taken by the stupendously talented soprano Laura Wilde. I'm delighted that Laura has agreed to be with us today, thanks to the miracle of technology, to speak with us a little bit about music and life. Laura, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be chatting about this piece.
So how are you? How have you been holding up during this whole mess?
Oof. I'm doing pretty well. It's sort of been up and down, I think, for our whole industry and the world, of course. And I think that we've just been holding our breath, waiting to see what's going to happen with this. And I've been lucky enough to be able to hide away for most of the quarantine with my parents. I'm from South Dakota. So I escaped the big city and went home where I had some space and could be outside. And so I'm doing okay.
Great. So you've managed to be away from Chicago during the bulk of this anyway.
Yes. Yeah. I just got back to Chicago about a week and a half ago and then took off again to help some family move. But it was good to get back to the city. A lot is going down there right now as well. And I love my city. And so I felt really great to get back there and sort of be supporting my community.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate that you're giving your time today to chat with me. I know that our audience is very eager to learn more about you. So let's first turn back the clock. And I'm curious if you're able to tell us what first sparked your interest in and love for music. Do you come from a musical family?
Not particularly. So I had actually I'm named after my grandmother, my grandma Laura, and she was pretty musical. She could chord on the piano and loved to sing and sing harmony. So there was always music around, but there wasn't really classical music. And so it wasn't I grew up on old musicals. That was sort of my first love. My actual first love was Howard Keel, the old musical star. And just at even just grade school age, that was sort of, I loved those old musicals, Calamity Jane and Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. And so I always had music around and was always musical, but it wasn't till I started playing trumpet in 5th grade. And so trumpet, starting in middle school, became my main focus along with dance and some other artistic things. But from basically starting high school, trumpet was my career path. And so I was taking lessons from an incredible college professor who was willing to teach a middle schooler trumpet. And I had a wonderful mother who drove me to the university 45 minutes each direction. And so that was my dream. I loved playing in pit orchestras. I loved movie soundtracks. Had a dream of being in the London Symphony Orchestra. And then it wasn't till I went to Interlochen Arts Camp for trumpet in Michigan that I took voice lessons for the first time and had actually discovered I had a classical voice when making fun of opera at one point in a choir concert. And so when I was at Interlochen, I took lessons and the teacher said, you should maybe get some lessons when you get home. There's a voice in there. And at the time I identified so much as an instrumentalist and a trumpet player. And so I started my undergraduate degree in trumpet performance and luckily had gotten in on both. I quickly took lessons and auditioned on voice as well, and went to St. Olaf College where both my trumpet teacher and my voice teacher really let me explore both avenues sort of to the greatest extent. And eventually, halfway through my degree, switched to vocal performance and never looked back.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's one of the great things about so many of those liberal arts schools. I went to Luther myself.
Oh, you did?
So,
that was
so our viewers are
on my
not
list.
too at sea. St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, and Luther College in Decorah, Iowa are very fine schools that have a long-standing musical rivalry. What with both schools being deeply steeped in the Lutheran choral tradition.
Of course, with Weston Noble, right?
With Weston Noble, and you had Anton Armstrong, probably.
Yes, and I have the T-shirt that said "Weston wants you" after going to audition at Luther. So it was the Midwest liberal arts schools were all on the list.
So we're simpatico. We understand each other. So then, what happened after St. Olaf?
So I ended up going to Indiana University, and this whole time I should also point out I was a mezzo soprano. So I mean, I really didn't know much of what I was doing. And when you're at those small programs, you do sort of whatever they need in terms of roles. And so I had a teacher in undergrad who always guessed that I would be a soprano, but she knew I wouldn't be a light voice soprano. And so she just let me sing whatever key was comfortable. And I did Carmen my senior year at St. Olaf. And so Indiana University was very different. It was hundreds of singers. St. Olaf was really great about having just a handful of performance majors. I'm sure Luther was the same. And most of the best musicians there went on to be chemists and, professors, doctors. And so Indiana University ended up much more like a conservatory feel for my master's, where there were just hundreds of singers, 7, double cast giant productions a year. And I had an incredible technician for Professor Costanza Cucaro.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And again, she was a big believer in the Zwischenfach because I had high notes, but I also could sing. I sang Italian Girl. My second year there, Joe March, which is very low, and Little Women. And so I think all of my teachers, I was lucky because they just encouraged healthy singing, never over darkening, and having a range. And so I
remember hearing you several years ago as a mezzo soprano, actually, with unbelievable high notes.
Weird. I was wondering because I felt like we had met before, and I'm trying to remember.
Well, where it was, and it was dates are escaping me at the moment. 2010, 2011, maybe. And I think the first time I heard you was in an audition for the Seattle Opera Young Artist Program.
Yes.
And we had nothing appropriate that year for mezzos, and so it didn't work out. But I do remember your audition, and I think you sang Composer from Ariadne.
I'm sure I did.
I think that 10 years later, that high B flat is still ringing in my ears. And of course, a lot of singers' voices change over time. They take on different colors and weights, and different parts of the range begin to work differently. What was it? One thing for you that made you realize that you might want to live a little bit higher, or was it just sort of a natural evolution?
It was a combination of things. I think it was someone telling me that a director I was working with telling me I was singing Cybele and Faust, and he sort of said, well, pretty bluntly, you're not a mezzo. I hear Tosca was what he said at the time, which I haven't been doing that rep as much, but at when I first heard it, I was working. I was in a young artist program. I had gone through St. Louis and Santa Fe as a mezzo soprano, and so I wasn't really ready to hear that because I felt like I was singing the roles well. I had this teacher who encouraged good high notes and mezzos. And I think that there's also an identity aspect of that. It was similar to when I gave up trumpet. I was just crushed for a very long time to give up that childhood dream and that identity of being an instrumentalist and the collaboration of orchestral playing. And so I think that as a mezzo, there was also this, an identity attached to it that I wasn't quite ready to give up. But then it wasn't actually the the summer after that was first told to me, I went to Santa Fe and was a young artist there. And that's when I just started playing with soprano arias with one particular coach there, and finally had someone who had been a part of my journey for a while. I said, people have been saying this, and I sang a soprano aria for him, and he said, you're a soprano.
Yeah.
And
somehow at 7,000 feet, it all made sense.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
And I think that I then started realizing, that I would sing low arias and feel like I hadn't really sung, and because there was only maybe one small high note. And so then I ended up, my first big audition was at the Ryan Opera Center with the Lyric Opera of Chicago. And I had done the first round of auditions as a mezzo. So I was in the finals as a mezzo, and they were wonderful enough to say, just bring whatever you have, soprano, mezzo. And I ended up singing 2 soprano arias in the auditions, and they took me before I'd even transitioned as a soprano. So the decision was then made, and painstaking journey began.
but a successful one.
Yeah, it was the right decision.
That's great. Let's turn our attention for the moment to Don Giovanni.
Yeah.
Of course, you've sung a lot of Mozart heroines already. I know you've sung Fior di Ligi and Così fan tutte, the Countess in Marriage of Figaro, but this will be your debut as Donna Anna, is that correct?
Yes, it will be.
So how do you find this character to be different from, say, the Countess? And does it pose any special vocal or musical challenges that these other Mozart ladies might not?
Well, that's the thing with Mozart. I feel like they're all Fiordiligi. So I've done Viteria, Fiordiligi, and Countess up to this point, and
very different.
Very different. They all sit in completely different parts of the voice. They have no Mozart is easy, and so they all are particularly difficult. But I think that with Anna, character-wise, I think she's really interesting. I think that there's an incredible amount of like a wide range of ways you can understand her and you can interpret her. And I think depending on, I don't know, I'm such a character-driven singer. I love the job of connecting the dots of a character's journey and reacting to what colleagues bring on stage, and which makes me see my lines different depending on how they give them to me. And so I'm sort of coming with ideas, but also recognizing that with a role like this, her relationship to Don Ottavio, her feelings towards Don Giovanni, her understanding of her situation, depending on what the director brings, is going to completely change how I sing all of the recits, what each of the arias mean. So I'm really excited for that part, because I just don't have, this isn't one part of sort of transitioning from mezzo to soprano later than a lot of other people have in the process, is that there are a number of these Mozart roles that sopranos have been singing for years. And I'm sort of later in the career coming to them for the first time. So I'm excited to get my hands on it, character-wise. But vocally, Donna Anna is very difficult. It's
for sure.
The entire thing sits at the top of the range. So you have to be completely warmed up by the time it starts, but you can't be over warmed up because it's a long evening. And so it's for me, because I'm also still not that many years into my transition, every new role, every new composer sort of brings this, all right, how do I figure this out? What does my voice want to do when I have to sing this repertoire? And so we'll see. So far I'm loving learning it, though.
Great. And not only does it sit high, but you have to make sound up there. I mean, yes. I know also that you've been doing a lot of Wagner in recent seasons. Personally, I absolutely adore big voices in Mozart.
That's wonderful.
Have you found that there are any particular adjustments that you feel like you have to make singing Mozart as opposed to the big Wagner heroines?
Yes.
Or is it completely dependent on the role?
This has been an interesting, quarantine has given me a lot of time. I think my past couple seasons, I've had so much packed into them that I've basically had just enough time to get the role memorized. And then in the process, I sort of figure out how to sing it. And it's been thrilling to sort of have this time to have finished up. I unfortunately, quarantine hit right in the middle of Valkyrie rehearsals at the Lyric the Ring cycle. And I had 2 days of tech with Sieglinde, and then it was canceled. And so I had, for months, I had been singing, you know, big, heavy. I'd done Russian before that, and then this, and it's very middle heavy. They're big high notes, but you don't sit as high. And so it took me a while to get my voice sort of shifted up when I started working on Anna. And it's a different placement. There's a different tilting. You can't bring the same weight all the way up and sustain that with Donna Anna. And so I've been sort of playing around with, you know, what's the best way to do this, and how many different ways can I sing this A natural, which there are 50 million A naturals in Donna Anna.
Yes, there are.
But it's definitely a different approach, and the stamina issues are different in each of those.
Yeah, it's for sure needing a lot of agility and a lot of heft. And you know, sopranos have told me for years. A lot of our viewers will know Donna Anna has 2 big arias. She has Orsacchi l'onore in the first act and Non mi dire in the second act. And one thing that I've always heard is that typically half of the people who sing the role find Orsacchi l'onore to be not so difficult, but Non mi dire to be just a killer. And the other half say, oh, Non mi dire is sort of a walk through the park, but Orsacchi l'onore. Do you find that also to be the case, or is it just easy for you from beginning to end?
I think no, Donna Anna is not easy for anyone all the way from beginning to end. You know, it's funny, when I first started playing with it, Orsai felt just fine, and Non mi dire was a struggle. But I think that's because Orsai lends itself a little bit more to that Wagnerian balls to the wall, you know, but to be able to sustain the entire role and get to Non mi dire and be able to be delicate up high, I've now sort of found a place where Non mi dire feels great, and Orsai, I still have to figure out sort of how to do that in a way that allows me to be able to sing the rest of the role. So I actually am honored enough I knew Carol Vaness when I was at Indiana University, and have been chatting with her a little bit about this, and I'm planning on having a couple Zoom or FaceTime sessions with her on this, because she was one of the great Donna Annas of the generation. And so the more I've been picking a lot of brains, because this is such an iconic beast of a role that I've been waiting to get to. And so it's great. I think that with Mozart especially, it teaches you so much about your instrument. I always try to work to make sure I'm not trying to make my voice into something, but I'm trying to discover what my voice wants to do. And I think Mozart is sort of the perfect vehicle for discovering new things about your voice.
Well, I have heard that from a lot of people, and I have no doubt that that's the case. So hoping that we will come out of this awful pandemic sooner rather than later, and that we'll all be able to get back to work at some point. What is coming up for you in future seasons? Is there anything that you're able to speak about publicly?
Yeah, well, if you know, the 2021 season happens, I will be doing another Don Giovanni with Seattle Opera.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, in January, the end of January. And then I go to do a Così with Washington National Opera with Renee Fleming's directorial debut, which
fantastic.
I'm pretty thrilled about. Yeah, and I'm, you know, along with the rest of my colleagues, all of these debuts and productions that we've been looking forward to for years, we're all kind of keeping our fingers crossed that they can happen.
Sure. Well, you've got a lot of Mozart ahead of you if it works out.
I do,
so that's good.
Yeah.
Laura, what keeps you busy when you're not singing?
Right now I'm with 4 of my 7 nieces and nephews. So I'm big on family and being an aunt, and keeping in touch with my loved ones. It can be you know, traveling and such can be a pretty difficult, lonely experience. And so I've always prioritized sort of the people in my life. I'm a big reader. I'm into podcasts, and enjoy working out. I've also been working in some recent years. Well, I've known about with an organization in Brazil, in Fortaleza, Brazil. It's a school called Channel to Brazil. And it's a school, it's a supplemental school for children in the favelas or the slums of Fortaleza. And I, a couple falls ago, was able to go down for the first time. I've known the organization since I was a child, since they started it, and finally was able to go down, and I fell in love with the place. I fell in love with the kids, with the program. I got to teach a class on opera, and the kids were so engaged with it, and just literally their just jaws dropped as they're learning about this, and I just feel like I left a little piece of my heart there. And so since being back, I've been working really hard to get the organization out, because it's a small organization. They have a small operation, only a couple people, and so I've been doing some fundraising recitals for that. I did one in Sweden, and I'm planning a couple in the States. And
it's a music-focused organization, is that?
Well, no. So it's a school. So it has academics and it has sports, and they have a theater program. They have music. It's in a place in Fortaleza where these children are dealing with such serious, heartbreaking poverty, drugs, prostitution issues, that the school really works hard to teach them that they have value as people, and that their lives can go a different direction. And so they help them find sort of what they're good at, what they're passionate about. And it's incredible. So if anyone's interested, the website is www.thechannel.org to check out more of their work. But that's
thechannel.org.
Thechannel.org. Yep. And that's been sort of my non-work, but using my voice to try to figure out how to I can only give so much. And I've just learned that the more people know, that's one thing we've learned about this during this pandemic, is we have an incredibly generous world when you tap into people's hearts. And so that's the work that I've been kind of passionately and shamelessly plugging.
Well, it sounds just magnificent. It sounds like you're providing a tremendously valuable service.
I'm trying.
So thank you for that. Our time is nearly up, I'm afraid, but before we go, I did want to ask, have you ever spent any time in the Berkshires before, or will this be your first visit?
You know, I have, and it took me a while to put it together, but some college friends and I did a vacation up in the Berkshires, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And it was incredible. We did a lot of hiking, and I had I noticed when I was starting to Google map, the theater and where we were going to be, that I already had some locations saved of restaurants we went to.
Oh, is that right?
We wanted to check out. So I'm really thrilled to get to go back there. It's such a beautiful part of the country, and we've been itching to get back there as well. We've talked about it before, and so it's pretty neat that I get to work there. Oh,
that's great. Well, let's hope some of these things will be open when you
I know,
arrive. But nature will still be open. So
it's true, and I'll wear a mask.
Great. I remember so clearly hearing you in the Richard Tucker Career Grant auditions in 2017, which you later, of course, went on to win. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I remember you sang Jenufa and Einsam in Triebentagen from Lohengrin.
Yes.
And I remember just being bowled over by it. Your agent was sitting a row ahead of me. And I remember talking to him in the moment and saying, we have to make this happen. And 3 years later, I'm happy to say that here we are, because I know that everyone is going to be as struck by the beauty of your voice and your musicality and your humanity as I was and am. So please come and hear Laura in Berkshire Opera Festival's Don Giovanni, which will play on Saturday, August 22nd, Tuesday, August 25th, and Friday, August 28th at the Colonial Theater in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Tickets are on sale through our website, which is berkshireoperafestival.org. Laura Wilde, thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you in the flesh in just about 2 months.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I'm so looking forward to meeting all of your patrons. You are how our business runs, and we're more grateful for you than ever during all this time.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks to all of you.